Welcome back to the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we are featuring Templeton. It's a very, very, very small city in Iowa. And we're excited to discuss their brand new bourbon called Fortitude. We're going to also dive into their new 10-year-old single barrel rye whiskey. And we are excited to be joined by Shane Fitzharris, all things commercial strategy for Infinium Spirits, but Templeton here today on the Bourbon Lens podcast. So sit back and buckle in and listen to our newest episode featuring Templeton. Shane, thank you for joining the podcast later than anticipated due to child issues, but everything is taken care of and no one was harmed in the making of this intro. So how's your evening?
Good. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you guys. I know we should have done this last week, but I had some children issues and children issues everywhere, but that's the life we lead.
Yeah.
I'm coming at you from a hotel in Des Moines, Iowa. We spent all day today at the Templeton Distillery, which was fantastic. We had 4 seasons in one day. We arrived to a storm and rain and lightning, and then we had beautiful sunshine in the afternoon, and perfect weather for growing corn. That's for sure. So you can definitely see why Iowa is the corn belt of the U.S. So happy to be here with you from that corn belt of the U.S.
Yeah, well, we're all dads, right? So we know what it's like to figure it all out as we go. And that is what we're doing. And Iowa, that is a state I've not been to. Scott, have you ever ventured to the great cornfield of Iowa?
No, I haven't. As much as I love corn.
I know.
Surprising.
You get enough of it here in Kentucky.
Yeah, I guess so.
And you just haven't ventured to where there's a lot more corn. So Shane, obviously people have heard your voice by now here on the podcast. You're not from there. There's not many people from there. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and working with Templeton to help create this overall strategy for them and their brand.
Yeah. So for anybody listening, obviously there's an Irish accent coming through the headphones. You can't lose this one. No matter how long you stay in the US, I think the Irish accent is one of those accents that you kind of carry through to life, which we love. We're very proud in Ireland, and I'm a very proud Irishman. I initially, I suppose, if you go back to the very start of my career, it was rooted in whiskey from the very start. We created an Irish whiskey brand called the Irishman with Bernard Walsh, who was from Walsh Whiskey, myself and himself, and we built that over time, and then we introduced Riders Tears into the mix from a portfolio perspective. Very quickly we realized that Ireland was we needed to go beyond Ireland, and we got on some planes and we started to sell the brand around the world and build our global footprint. That kind of progressed very quickly, well, not very quickly, but over time into building a distillery in the southeast of Ireland called Walsh Whiskey Distillery, and all was going well. And then I got this opportunity to, step into the American whiskey world with Templeton Rye at the time back in 2019, and the challenge there was to, grow our international footprint for Templeton. Back then there was no bottles of Templeton ever sold outside of the US market, and the Underwood family, who are fantastic people, wanted to kind of grow the global footprint. So I thought that was a good opportunity for me to get into, different spirits outside of the Irish category, grow my knowledge, of course, into American whiskey. And I did, and I took the plunge, and we started to, essentially grow Templeton from a global perspective in 2019. And we went from 0 countries then to a situation where we're now in 75 international markets with Templeton across 6 continents. And ultimately, that's what I've been concentrating on over the last 4 years. And then I suppose last year, there was an opportunity that came up for me to kind of move into the US side of the business as well. So I decided to do that. And that has resulted in a completely family move to the US, where we now live in San Diego, where our Infinium Spirits headquarters are. So I'm now kind of incorporating the US side of the business as well as the international business too. So it's all exciting. Of course, Infinium Spirits, we have, different brands in our portfolio, but Templeton is a jewel in the crown in relation to the opportunity that we have and the distillery and the brand. And, we're looking forward to kind of growing that over the next coming years.
So let me guess, the one continent that you don't sell Templeton in is Antarctica.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh man, the penguins need it.
Maybe one day.
That's very true. Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted.
Yeah, it's that's wild, man. From 2019 to 2024, exponential growth, right? From just consumer perspective, and that is the bourbon boom hockey, the American whiskey hockey stick, if we've ever seen one, right? Like, that's pretty cool. So how are you enjoying the States, right? So you've been here for a little bit now. Like, how's the move and the transition from Ireland to the US?
It's been great. I mean, listen, it's been a huge move, to be very honest. But I've got two little girls, like you guys have small children, and Amelia is 8 and George is 3, and my wife Melanie is a school teacher. And, we looked at the whole opportunity and we said, listen, now is a good time. The girls are young enough. And if we're ever going to do something like this, it's really now. And it's been great. It's been really great. The girls have settled in really well. We were worried about that in particular, because you think about your kids and you think about, will they settle in, and you kind of feel, is this the right thing to do for our family? But I think when I said to Amelia, listen, what do you feel about, moving to the US? And I sat her down in a very serious conversation. And, I said, would that be something, you think you would like to do? And she said, well, can I bring my roller skates? And I said, yes. She said, okay, I'm in. So I think that was, she was like all in from there. Georgia was young enough. She just didn't really, have any kind of understanding in a sense, but it's really been great. We've settled in really well. Everyone's been so supportive, at Infinium, and at Templeton, such good people. So it's been fantastic. It's early days. But we love it. We love it over here. Everyone's been so good. And it's been a great few months, to be honest.
Well, and you went to where it's like 70 degrees every day. So, you could pick worse places to live.
Good.
So, good on you, right? For at least moving them to where she could use her roller skates on a daily basis if she so chose.
Yeah. It's let's be honest. It's an easy decision. If someone says, hey, do you want to move to San Diego with your kids? It's not like, you're moving to a very, very cold place in, Antarctic.
Yeah, you didn't move them to Antarctica to go sell whiskey to the penguins.
Which is why we're missing that continent, actually.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, here's your two options: San Diego, Antarctica. Like, what do you want to do? And you're like, one cost a little bit more than the other. And surprisingly, San Diego was probably the cheaper option than Antarctica.
I would say, well, yeah, it's given it a run for its money now, I think.
Yeah. So, that's awesome. And I appreciate that. Scott and I appreciate that from a backstory perspective. And Templeton's been built on rye whiskey, right? So, as you all have come up and created, your all's brand, it's been in the secondary American spirit for a long time in rye whiskey. So why did they start with rye? And how did you all get to the point where like, hey, we gotta get a distillery built and we gotta put down our bourbon? Like, how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, you know what? Templeton is a really interesting story. If you go back obviously to the 1920s, where Templeton Rye became, something that was quite popular within the Midwest, and the town of Templeton. It probably starts with the town of Templeton, actually. Templeton, for a lot of people in the US may know Templeton's a real place, but if you actually take a global mindset and you talk to people in Beijing, you talk to people in Paris, and you talk to people in UK, and you do these presentations, they don't know Iowa, they don't know Templeton, they don't really have any kind of understanding of that this is a real place. And if you talk to people and you say Templeton is actually a real place, let me tell you the story. It is a really interesting thing to take people through. And if you go back to like Templeton, of where it started, and it being a small town in the Midwest of the US with a population of just like 350 to 355 people, founded during the 1882 construction of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Pacific Railway line. It's really a town has a history that's strongly rooted in agriculture, an entrepreneurial spirit, actually, which is quite interesting in terms of Templeton's story in itself, because that ultimately led to a bootlegging story that really stands strong in relation to the brand or the brand name for over 100 years. The community is really interesting down there. And as I said, I spent all day today down there with them. It's an amazing town. It's really a community that really respects one another. They support each other. They rally together when anything needs to be done. They're really behind each other. I think when you think of, and we'll get to this when we talk about bourbon and the word fortitude and why it's called fortitude, and it really is back into the strength of the town of Templeton and why over the last 100 years they've shown that fortitude and that strength and that resilience to overcome many challenges that have happened. And Prohibition was one of those challenges, of course. And during Prohibition, for a town that was rooted in agriculture, out of basically economic necessity, those people in Templeton had to, start to make an illegal spirit that they kept their town alive by and kept the soul of their hometown by selling this illegal spirit during Prohibition. They did it in their outhouses, they did it in their farms, they did it in their kitchens. There was 3 or 4 particular families that really led the charge, the Earlbecks, the Kirkhoffs, and essentially that kept them going through a very difficult period. And that became known as the Templeton Rye. So that spirit became known as the Templeton Rye during 1920s into 1930s. And of course, when Prohibition went away, essentially Templeton Rye went away. Into 2006, jump forward in 2006, one of the original bootleggers, Alphonse Kirkhoff, his grandson, Keith Kirkhoff, decided to resurrect the brand by sourcing liquids and creating Templeton Rye as a brand. The Templeton Rye that was produced in the 1920s, of course, there was no regulation, there was no legislation. It was more, a lot of sugar was used, a lot of molasses was used. It was more like a rum than it was a whiskey as such. But essentially, that was resurrected in 2006 as a source product that was done by Keith Kirkhoff, and that then became very, very popular overnight because people remembered the Templeton Rye, they remembered what they called the good stuff that people would sell underneath their kitchen tables and stuff like that. So the whole thing is kind of spurred on from there. During that particular time, the Underwood family got involved in the brand, and Vern Underwood, who is such a brilliant man, who is obviously the owner of Young's Market, which was a wholesale company that have since sold to RNDC, but Young's Holdings, which is Infinium Spirits and Templeton Distillery, he was just absolutely, so impressed with Templeton as a town and really wanted to give back to that town. And his commitment was to build a distillery and bring back the distilling to the town of Templeton, as opposed to just being an independent bottler that was sourcing their liquid. That came to fruition in 2017, maybe, when there was a ribbon cutting, or we cut the ground on the distillery. 2018, we officially opened the distillery. We started distilling in 2018 at Templeton, which was a state-of-the-art distillery that had a visitor center, a museum, bottling line, an unbelievable distillery that can produce all styles of American whiskey. And really, now it's kind of evolved into the next stage of the story for Templeton.
And it's a lot bigger than one of those kitchen-sized stills, right?
Yeah.
You know what? It really is. As I said, it's a 20-acre site located right on the edge of the town of Templeton. It's a 35,000 square foot distillery. It's a visitor center. We have a museum. We have the capacity to produce over 3 million bottles per year. We now have 55,000 square foot maturation and barrel aging warehouses. Our pot and column stills come from 4 sites in Scotland. We all wanted that to be quality. We wanted to make sure that we were getting the best quality of a still so that we could produce the best quality spirit. We have the ability to distill all styles of American whiskey under one roof. We have the bottling plant facility on site. It originally started off as a $40 million project, but as they say, if you want to lose money, build a distillery. So it's been a lot more than that original $40 million project, that's for sure. So it is a pretty impressive place. But I think in relation to the brand, the Templeton brand, the story, going from that original 1920s kind of, bootlegging empire, the good stuff, which was, not like rye whiskey that we know today, and then evolving then into 2006 of a independent bottler sourced brand that now is evolving into its own distilling world and, growing upwards and outwards into different categories. So I suppose the last piece that you mentioned was the bourbon and how we ended up in bourbon as opposed to, a rye that we've been known from for so long. Well, that was by design. And I think I was really trying to kind of, tell people we have this unbelievable future ahead of us. And yes, we're inspired by the past and we respect the past, but we're looking ahead to the future. And the future is this unbelievable distillery that we can make all styles of American whiskey. And Templeton's story is only half told. So it's not just going to be about Templeton Rye. It's going to be about Templeton Bourbon. It's going to be about Templeton Single Malt. It's going to be about Templeton Heated Bourbon and, different things that we can distill and how we can innovate through, our fermentation or maturation or distillation. And it's going to grow upwards and outwards. And I think by us introducing Templeton Fortitude Bourbon as our first distillate coming out of that distillery, it organically allows the conversation to go there and talk about the distillery and the capability.
Yeah. So thank you for making our job easy as you kind of led us into the bourbon. I was texting Scott on the side over here, and I've been looking at the press release as we go because it's, following along, right, with all the points you're hitting. Scott, you got the bourbon in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Is this your first time sitting down with it, or if you had it before?
I had a little bit of it probably a couple of weeks back, a preview with no tasting notes, which is nice. I mean, revisiting it tonight, so it's kind of fresh, I guess, because it's been a little while. Yeah.
All right. So a couple things that stuck out to me, and you're just a part of the room, Shane, as we have this conversation. I think for the mash bill on this, 55 corn, 40% rye, 5% malted barley, I think it has more of a corn note to it than a 55% corn would say in my mind. I was thinking, almost Kentucky bourbon, corn notes, because on me for the nose, I got a lot of that corn flavor on the nose, but it's really bready and some nuts like macadamia or almond kind of show up. It's kind of sweetness, it spikes and then it kind of mellows off to me, which I thought was a very approachable nose. And so Scott, you're our corn guy, right? As you mentioned earlier, and then Shane, we'll interested to know your thoughts on this. What did you think? Did you get any of that corn, more corn grain than corn sweetness? You know what I mean?
I guess I was kind of thinking breadiness, like cornbread, but yeah, I didn't get, I guess maybe as much corn as you did. I got a lot more malty characteristics, like malt balls almost. I don't know if that's
not mothballs, malt balls,
malt balls, like chocolate malt balls. But yeah, it's definitely got a nice sweetness on the nose, but then it kind of tingles the nostrils as well, which I would expect with 40% rye character, having that little spicy note carry through. But I don't get it. I don't get as much corn as you seemingly do. I mean, I don't obviously know exactly what percentage you feel, but I mean, I'm not getting as much corn as I would have expected from an Iowa bourbon.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about that mash bill as we'll unpack this a little bit more. So this is interruption for you all listeners who are like, hey, let's go grab a bottle. We're going to let Shane talk.
Yeah, you're both correct in a sense. I think when you think about that particular mash bill, which was the first ever mash bill that we did in 2019 for bourbon, we spent most of half of 2018 distilling rye whiskey, actually, which was the 95 and 5 that we would have been kind of sourcing the liquid all those years before. And we spent most of 2018 distilling the rye. We switched to bourbon in 2019 and started distilling bourbon for the first time. And the first distillation that we did at Templeton Distillery was this high rye mash bill. The idea behind that really at that particular time was because, look, Templeton Rye is known as Templeton Rye. If we're going to come up with a bourbon, we want it to be a very, a high rye bourbon. And, when you think about high rye in our industry, anything that's above 15% rye in a mash bill, we talk about it being high rye or 15 to 20%. I think the fact that we're delivering a 40% rye is, really ultra high rye, if you want to call that. But we wanted to kind of allude to the fact that, yes, we're a rye whiskey. So, that was where we wanted to go with this. So having 55% corn, 40% rye, and a 5% malted barley is going to give you a very unique flavor profile that is not necessarily like your normal bourbons in relation to the sweetness. You are going to get that pepper and spice because ultimately 40% rye is a very, very high to have in a mash bill. So you're going to get that pepper and spice coming through on the rye, and you do get that kind of a little bit on the nose, and you get it on the taste, but then you get this beautiful kind of a floral finish, which is actually where the malted barley kicks in. And the malted barley, where to be honest with you, we've got 5% malted barley in here, which helps us with the distillation because rye whiskey, to try and distill that can be quite gluey and difficult to distill. Especially when you have 40% rye in mash bill, but the 5% actually helps with the distillation, but it also gives you this beautiful floral vanilla finish. And I think that actually comes through a lot in relation to the finish more than I would have expected. And I do get that pepper and spice up front, but I get this lovely floral note that comes through on it, which is a little bit more like, malted barley than it is really the corn. So it is by design a very different style of a bourbon simply because you've got that 40% rye in there, which is, very unique in terms of many bourbons that are out there right now.
Yeah. I feel like the corn helps carry some of the spiciness that a rye whiskey would just might be a little bit too sharp, especially for like a bourbon drinker like me who likes a little bit of sweetness. So it kind of carries, it's got like a little bit more viscosity to it, and it's not as pointed, I guess you could say, like I'm just thinking like spiciness just kind of jabbing you a little bit, but I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. But
so I think I figured out kind of like the spice rack. Like I had to rack my brain a little bit, but there's like some coriander. Like I want to sometimes I wish I just had like my baking spices here while I like drank whiskey, just like people, my wife would look at me like, what the hell are you doing?
Come out sneezing.
Just huffing paprika, just trying to find it in whiskey. But the funny thing is for the earthiness and some of the characteristics that are on the nose, I'm going to throw out the most, I think probably the wildest tasting note I've ever gotten. Watermelon water. Yes. So like if you were to like squeeze the watermelon down and like it's kind of like it's very faint. I wanted to say just melon, but that was too generic. But I have this, you are the things that come to your mind, right? There's this thing, Advocare has this energy package called Spark. They have a watermelon flavor. It reminds me of that. It's just water in this package. And like I add a lot more water than it calls for. So it's less concentrated. So I can drink it over time and increase my water intake, drink responsibly and drink and hydrate. And so that it's a weird note, but like it was like this watermelon water a little bit of the cornbread vanilla. The nuttiness is showing up for me everywhere, like macadamia, but it's like a very summery bourbon, like at 92 proof, super approachable. So that was kind of like it. My first thought was it's a summer bourbon, and 2, perfect time to release it. And then 3, I was like shocked. What the hell's watermelon water in my head? But we all have these sensory recalls, and that's what it tastes like to me.
Yeah, I think the summer piece is a good point, because it is a light bourbon. I think when you look at it, you taste it, it is a summer bourbon. It's not very heavy, and it's subtle. You've got subtle rye spice in there. You've got, even though the 40% rye in a mash bill would tell you you're going to get a lot more, but it's actually quite subtle. It's not overbearing. I don't think the spice is overbearing. And I do think there's a nice balance of sweetness coming through. I also think that if somebody is like, a bourbon drinker likes their corn mash bill 70 plus or 75 plus, this is going to be a very different kind of an experience for you. And that's, again, I would say by design. I mean, this is a 40% mash bill of rye, and it's got 55% corn. It's going to be super different in that sense. But I think we've balanced up the rye spice with the kind of the sweetness of the corn. But I think that, again, that malted barley comes in at the end, and it's only 5%, but it does give you that nice floral finish to it. And yes, it's quite different. It's quite different, but that, again, was by design.
Yeah. Scott, what do you think? I mean, this is crushable to me. Like, throw this maybe with a rock and just pour there's session beer. This is session bourbon.
Yeah. Yeah. So like typically when I think like summer bourbon, I think like lower proof, but that's not the case here. Like, I think, what is it? 92 proof?
92. Yeah.
It's got ample amount of proof. Like you can tell you're drinking whiskey, but it does have some lighter, like it's almost like you have to sit with it for a little bit longer to kind of dissect it. Nothing really like boom, caramel, boom, vanilla, boom, like oak. You don't really get any of those to like stand out. It's just kind of, as you sit here, you kind of think about it, and it's like, okay, I'm getting a little bit of this. Like I got like a light fruit note at the end. I don't know that it was watermelon.
Just agree with me. It makes everything better.
I don't really drink watermelon water.
There's a bit of pineapple coming through on the finish in a sense.
But it does have like, I mean, you could sit here for it, an hour and sip through it and probably taste 10 different things, or maybe it changes as you're sitting here and it gets more air and oxygen to it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think it's very well rounded. I think, like I said before, I was expecting a spice bomb. I was expecting a ton of spice, but I really don't get that. I don't really get, you get like a little peppery on the tip of your tongue, like tingling, but then it just kind of carries through.
I think it's well balanced. It is well balanced. It's I think for the mash bill, for us to come out with a mash bill like that from the very start is kind of like, it's an interesting mash bill. There's not a lot of bourbons out there that are, over 40% rye in a mash bill. I think, for us, we want to continue to push the boundaries of what is possible at Templeton Distillery and do things a little bit differently. I think, interesting enough, and the year after we produced or distilled this particular mash bill in 2019, when we started to do that, we moved into another mash bill as well, which we have rolling at Templeton Distillery for future releases. And that's more to the 75% plus corn mash bill that we've got in there. And that's still to come in relation to a different bourbon that we want to release in the not so distant future. And both of them are going to be very different in flavor profiles, and both of them are going to kind of speak to different type of bourbon drinkers in terms of what they like, and whether they like, overly sweet kind of bourbon, or whether they like more spice. And I think for us, we're trying to, we're putting it out there as, we know this is, you're going to have certain people who like a certain thing, and other people like a certain thing, and we're going to be, the beauty about us now controlling our own destiny at Templeton is that we can actually, produce mash bills and whiskies that will cater for all different styles. An interesting story I have, and I always tell this story in relation to my own mother. And if we go back, many, many years, my mother she's a classic Irish Catholic mother. And, you go into my house in the southeast of Ireland, and you have to eat everything she gives you, and that's it. And she'd be insulted if you didn't. But I at the time we had this beautiful limited edition Irish whiskey, and I thought to myself, you know what? I got bottle number one. I'm going to give her bottle number two, and it was coming into Christmas, and this was super limited edition. I gave her bottle number two, and the following week I went out to her, and she said to me, "I need to get another bottle of whiskey off you." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Surely you didn't, drink that limited edition whiskey already?" And my father said she made Christmas cakes with it.
Oh.
and then she took the Jameson out of the press. So I was like, you know what? People like what they like, and that's it. And it's always a funny story. I always tell that story because people will like what they like, and they'll have their niche, kind of taste profiles. I think for this one, I particularly like it because there is that subtle spice that comes through. I don't think it's overbearing. I do think it takes in a lot of pineapple and citrus notes. So I think, Scott, you're not a million miles off. And I think there's a lovely flavor profile sweetness coming to the end of it. But again, it's a mash bill that's got 40% rye in there. It's going to be a little bit unique.
Well, I think it bridges a gap too, right? So like you said, it was strategic. It's okay. You might know us for Templeton Rye, which is almost entirely rye.
Yep.
But we want to introduce a bourbon. So we're going to kind of ease you into it. You still get your rye, and it still carries through, but we want to introduce that corn sweetness. We want to introduce a little bit more complexity. And then you could play around with your second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th mash bills too, and probably pull a lot of different levers and in your releases.
And I think that's interesting for us because you think about being an independent bottler for so long that has been sourcing their liquid for so long, and whether we mature it, those barrels at Templeton or not, this was kind of like a move to control our own destiny. So when we decided to build a distillery, it wasn't a short-term goal. That distillery is not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be there hundreds of years. So this is a long-term view, and if this allows us to really start putting our own DNA on our brand as we grow up and out. And I think with Templeton, we will, still play kind of the independent bottler because we've got a lot of source barrels that are at our distillery, but we also have this fantastic distillery that we're now starting to ease out our distillate. I would also fully expect our bourbons to evolve over time. This is our first distillate release from 2019, first time we've distilled bourbon. That's going to evolve. The flavor profile will evolve, and we will lean into that. As I said, we're looking to innovate. We want to do specific yeast strains. We want to do innovation with our fermentation. We want to do innovation with our maturation, how we distill our products. So we're only really at the only start of our story in relation to Templeton, which sounds a little bit crazy because the brand has been around for so long, but actually, we're really only moving into a new dawn, I think.
So you mentioned something about the distillery. So you have a pot and a column. So what's the distillation process like, right? As you talk about the evolution and the creativity that you all can create, what is that process for a standard distillation?
It's quite similar to, the normal distillation that you would see within the American whiskey sector. I think if you think about, how our process actually works, it's really going from grain to bottle. What we really want to do is, with the new distillate that's coming out of Templeton Distillery, in a way, we want to control that from start to finish. So essentially, we talked a little bit about, maybe terroir and what that brings to the distillate. We are working with local farms. That's where it starts. We work with local farms to produce the best quality grain. Those farms are within 15 miles of the Templeton Distillery. Once we do that, we obviously harvest that. With them, we transport it to the Templeton Distillery. It goes into the grain storage. But I think that particular point doesn't really do that justice, because we want to make sure that we're supporting the local farms by, working with them to grow the type of grain that we want them to grow. So, for instance, rye grain is difficult to grow in America. The quality of it is not essentially there within the Midwest. So we want to make sure that we're stimulating and supporting the farms, that we can get rye grain locally, that we can get, obviously corn is a lot easier because it's very locally produced, but we want to make sure that we're supporting those farms in a sense. So this needs to go from field to bottle, and we want to be as transparent as possible from start to finish. So from the harvest, transport to the distillery, into the grain storage. We then move that to the grain mill, of course. That moves to the mash tun cooker. Then it moves into fermentation. Then it goes into the beer well. Then it starts with the distillation. So first of all, it goes through the column still, which we have about 38 plates in the column still. That goes into the condenser. That becomes a low wine, goes into the low wine holding tank, which then goes into the high rye holding tank, and into the doubler, and then into the holding tank as well, which then goes into the barrels to be filled. So for us, it's very similar process. We don't really do anything different within that process, but what we try and do is we try and innovate along the way in terms of, how are we growing our grain? Where are we getting our grains from? How can we lean into the terroir of the Midwest? How can we lean into the terroir of the local farms? And, can we even, start tracing the fields to where does this whiskey come from? So I would like to be able to show you and bring you down and say, this whiskey came from this particular field. That's where we want to get to. We want to talk about, can we put GPS coordinates of the field up on our website that you can actually trace that back to? What type of farm? Can we profile the farmer that we got it from? Can we put him up or her up on the website? Can we give that, transparency to the whiskey drinker that they can, at any particular point in time, go field to bottle across this whole process? That's really where the additional transparency and information comes from. Because I think as consumers are, picking their whiskeys, they can pick, you walk into any Total Wine or any liquor store, there's so many choices now for people to make. How can we stand out? And I think for us, it's about, being totally field to bottle, and that terroir, and that Midwest story, that Templeton story, and that provenance, and that transparency. As I said, we've only really just started on that process. So the distillation process, like I just called out, is quite similar. There's nothing different in there, but we will innovate along the way. We'll innovate from how we grow our grains. We'll innovate from our yeast. We'll innovate from our maturation in terms of the temperature in the warehouse and the different things that we want to do. We want to try different areas of the warehouse, and we want to experiment over time and, really start to push the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I was just curious, with having them both available at your all's fingertips. I just poured the 10-year-old. Again, this is my first soiree into Templeton at all.
Really?
So you're spoiling me a little bit by starting at the top of the food chain here. There's some traditionalness to this. I'm assuming, I don't have a press release on this, but it's the 95.5 mash bill.
It is.
And when you all procure this, are you all bringing it to Iowa to age?
Yeah. So look, Templeton is, if you think about Templeton as in relation to, Templeton has always sourced its liquid. We call it independent bottlers in Ireland and Scotland.
Yeah. I
don't think independent bottler is a term you hear too often in America. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think for me, Templeton is an independent bottler and has been for many years. That should have been an open, transparent thing. There's nothing wrong with that. There's many brands do that. And you can source your liquid and you can create a brand while you kind of build your brand to where you actually decide that's now going to allow me to build a distillery where we can control our own destiny and move forward. So the story of Templeton is very normal to me in terms of Irish whiskey, Scots whiskey, brands that do that. I think for us, the tenure that you've got in front of you, that is sourced barrels. What we've done there is we brought them down to the maturation warehouse at Templeton, and they've aged in Templeton. But they're the 95.5% mash bill. What I wanted to do there with that tenure was obviously lead with the straight designation. I wanted to do a single barrel, which is a lot more work, but it gives people a little bit of a uniqueness to that tenure, in the sense that potentially every 25 cases would be a different single barrel number. So if you've got the bottle in front of you, you'll see the unique barrel number that's on that bottle. I wanted to do a 52% ABV, which is 104 proof. I thought that was the perfect flavor profile. And I'd say that tenure is one of the finest double-digit whiskeys that's out there for the value, for the money that's there. Sourced, obviously, from a fantastic distillery that's good at making whiskey. There's not too many tenures from that distillery in itself out there. And this is just a beautiful whiskey that you add a little bit of water to it, brings down that flavor, that ABV a little bit more, opens up all the flavors. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked about the maturation is because it is very unique, right? It has a unique flavor profile. It's got a unique nose. Scott, like, I feel like this kind of maybe a 95.5 that kind of is more up your alley than, any of the evergreen type of rye whiskeys, the pine, right? What's your thoughts, just kind of out the gate here on the 10?
Initially I found one of the notes that I like in a lot of whiskeys is like tobacco. Like it's rich, like raisiny. You can tell that it's got some age on it, which is great, because these mash bills, I don't really care for them when they're like the bright green, fresh cut grass. I don't like it. I like my bourbons, and I think when rye whiskey gets a little bit older and more barrel influence, it kind of morphs into like, is this a bourbon? Like you could almost like, whoa, where did all this barrel characteristic come from? It's taken over that bright green note. So yes, I do enjoy this one. I do enjoy this one. Short answer.
Yeah, it's definitely different for me. I think the rye spice is kind of right on there, pepper, nutmeg, those types of traditional fall flavors, as we'll call them, right? But it's balanced by caramel, butter, or butterscotch, right? Kind of in between those two things. But there's a nice, like, I don't know how it's happening. I promise you, I just washed my glass with water. I did like a water rinse before this, but like this has some citrus melony characteristics as well. So I don't know if it's how it's aged, if it's because it's a little bit older, if it's just a very unique single barrel, like you mentioned, right, Shane? But this is kind of hitting some notes for me that would be really nice in a variety of different places, right? Neat pour, yes. Over a cube, yes. Can I take this to a cocktail? And I'm not even thinking of my traditional bourbon cocktails here or whiskey cocktails. I'm thinking like this would be a really fun way to, like, this barrel in particular. This would be cool to do a whiskey Rita with this one, right? Because it has some citrus and spice characteristics that would play really well to replace the tequila out with this. Now, would you want to do that with this spirit? Probably not. But I can see where it's got a place and time, maybe going into a spirit in a cocktail as well, because shoot anymore, people will call crazy cocktails with a crazy high whiskey because they love the flavor profile that whiskey produces. So more power to you. I'm drinking this neat probably 9 times out of 10 before I mix it with anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think the maturation piece is interesting, because when you think about, a lot of people say, okay, Templeton has sourced the liquid for so long, and you can buy this and you can buy that and it'll be the same. But actually, when we think about maturing the barrels at Templeton, which we do, So we get it from, we can source those liquids many, many years ago. The barrels will come to Templeton, they'll mature there. Now, today when I was at the distillery, the maturation warehouse, which I hope you guys can come and see it soon, two phenomenal maturation warehouses. They were originally set up to be temperature controlled, which obviously finance people love that because there's no angel share too often within the first couple of years. But we as whiskey people, we want that kind of that heat and that cold, and we want that contracting, and we want to kind of get that whiskey moving in and out. So in actual fact, at Templeton, even though we built a warehouse that was temperature controlled, we don't actually turn on that temperature control. We open the doors, we open the big doors, we let the heat in, we let the cold in. It comes in. We've got the big fans that blow hot air in the summer. We want to get that heat coming in. We want to get that cold coming in. And in actual fact, we've got certain parts of that warehouse that we call them the honey spots, and we know where it really, the barrels mature in a greater way. So that whole maturation piece and being all about the wood can't be discounted in relation to, how a whiskey progresses and changes over time. So you could essentially, source a 95 and 5 from a particular distillery, and you could age it in Templeton, Iowa, and you could also age it in, Dublin, Ireland. They're going to be two very, very different whiskies. And we are seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that with the tenure. And even so, not only seeing it from looking at what everybody else is doing, but even our barrels are different. So you might have a 10-year single barrel, which you've got in front of you at a specific number. You may get another one, and that just might not be what this one is like for you. And I love that. I think that's the beauty of whiskey. I think that's the beauty of you can't control it. You just can't control this to a very specific end. And I love that, okay, I'll try this barrel, I'll try that barrel, I'll try this barrel number, and they'll all be a little bit different. And I think the tenure kind of speaks to that, which is what I love. And that's why I wanted to do a single barrel. I wanted to make sure it was a single barrel. It's more work for us. It's like every 20 cases is, new labels and new barrel numbers, and we have to dump a single barrel, individually. But this is really for the whiskey aficionado. This is for us to be very open, very transparent. This is source product. It's 95 and 5. It's aged for 10 years. It's 52% ABV. It's natural. It's non-chill filtered. And it's a bloody good whiskey. And I think, every barrel will be slightly different. And I want people to play with it. And I want people to add a little bit of water and try the different barrels and get those conversations going. Again, that's what the design of this product is.
Yeah, no, 100% agree.
I could just sit here and smell this one for quite a while.
It's fantastic. It really is.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I crushed the Fortitude. So Scott gave me 3.5 ounces of that. So I can't really go all in on the Templeton on the rye. So to be completed on another tasting when my palate is, the ability to thought provoke a little bit more, because to be honest, I didn't know what to expect. I'm going back to the bourbon here for a second because I didn't know what to expect, right? Scott and I kind of offhand talked about this a little bit as your all's first kind of jump into your own distillation. I was like, meh, 92, this weird mash bill, what happened? But Scott will tell you, I don't just sit here and just crush the whiskeys, if I don't like them. And I had not drank whiskey for a week. This has been a week since I have had a drink. And that's kind of what I needed. I need to ease my way back in. I didn't need to go off the deep end into some of these 130 proof whiskeys. This has been a really great reentry, and I'm now excited to go have another whiskey tomorrow, right? or in a day or two, because this kind of got my palate right back to invigorate me. So I'm super thankful for that. And I think consumers for $39.99 will be super thankful for that bourbon once they get a hold of it. That's now available, starting here in April. So that's big time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing I think a lot of people, I was scrolling through Twitter/X. And I think that's one of the things people don't appreciate is like, man, whiskey got expensive in a heartbeat here in America. Like for craft brands, right? Quote unquote. Even if you're producing at some scale, but like $39.99 is a very approachable price point for all consumers, right? It could be a shelfer for a lot of folks. So, you know, that's what I'm going back to the bourbon because that's what, you know, we are the Bourbon Lens. So I think good job, right? Like I'm impressed, and I think a lot of people should check it out, give it a try because it's a really good bourbon, and I'm really excited to see what the other mash bills have to say about that here in a couple of years when they're ready to come out.
Yeah, I think the bourbon price point is right where we want it to be. I think we built it off a, you know, consumer-based price point. This is where we wanted to be. We wanted to make this accessible. You know, the interesting thing about Templeton is that even though it's been around for a long time and, you know, everyone will know Templeton Rye, we're still a craft distillery, if you like. So we only can produce 8,000 barrels per year at Templeton Distillery. That's it. That's the max, 8,000 barrels. So technically, we're a craft distillery. We can't make distillate as cheap as we can technically buy it in the past. But what we want to do now is we want to move into this new era for Templeton, where we want to kind of, as I said, respect the past, look where we've come from. But we now have a fantastic distillery. We are completely, you know, determined to move into this new dawn. We want to bring the consumers along with us, and we want to bring new consumers along with us. So if you think about Templeton and you think about, you know, whether it's over time, it was, you know, was the distillate come from Templeton? Was it not come from Templeton? How did that all work out 10, 12 years ago and everything that went on, in a sense? We're moving past that because now it's about, we're owning our story, but we're creating our future. And we want to have open, transparent conversations about that and say, yes, we have been an independent bottler, but now we're moving into a distilling world. And this is what our bourbon looks like. And this is where our grain comes from. And it's straight and it's natural and it's non-chill filtered and it's, you know, it's a mash bill. And, you know, we want you to get into the weeds in relation to how we're distilling things and what yeast we're using. And because that's what people want to know. And we want to embrace that. And then it just becomes a personal, you know, opinion in terms of, well, I like sweet whiskey or I like spice whiskey. And that's totally fine as well. I think if we move forward over the next couple of years, we're still going to play that independent bottler and that distilling world because we've got, you know, 50,000 barrels of whiskey in our Templeton warehouse. And some of them we've distilled ourselves and most of them we did and others we didn't. So we're going to continue to release some exciting releases that are sourced liquids. So, you know, for instance, we're going to be releasing Midnight Rye over the next couple of years, which is, couple of weeks, which is a blend of straight rye whiskeys that are all sourced, blended with port wine. That's going to be an exciting thing that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. That one is going to work very differently than our own distillate, which is bourbon. But what I guarantee you is we're going to make sure that every release we have, we're very clear where it's coming from and where it's being distilled and how it's being distilled so that we can, you know, control that narrative going forward. And those worlds can play and will play, work side by side as we evolve and as we continue to grow from an independent bottler to a distiller.
I think that's super exciting, and I'm excited to watch the future unfold for Templeton. And this is the stuff that Scott and I really enjoy, is being able to see, you know, brands unfold and grow. And this is the first of many kind of conversation starters for us, right? You know, Scott, I don't know how you feel, but, you know, I'm excited to see what's next for Templeton.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great time for Templeton. It's been a while since I've had Templeton Rye. I think it was like a 4-6-year-old rye whiskey. The 10-year, I really enjoy it, which I'm not a big rye whiskey drinker. As always, like Jake said, we like to see brands as they grow. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of brands that we've had on multiple times. We've done 275 plus episodes. So it's like,
wow,
you know, it's like over a 3-year span or a 2-year
Yep.
span or a 5-year span. I mean, to see the brands and as they evolve, I think it's really cool. So I think this is a great, like Fortitude Bourbon, I think is a great position for you guys as you continue to evolve.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good kind of step forward. You know, as I said, everything is for us. We have a very enviable situation where we have a beautiful distillery. We have, we're building up our own distillate, which is bourbon and rye, and we've just started distilling single malt. We will start to distill single malt this year. Next year we will release rye whiskey, which is going to be our own distillate, and without giving too much away, but that's going to be like Resilience Rye, which is the follow-up of Fortitude Bourbon, which is going to be essentially our own distillate coming out of the distillery as well. And we're going to continue to innovate with our source liquid that we currently have in barrels at the distillery, because ultimately we have them there. So we're going to do, as I said, Midnight Rye. You're going to see that coming soon, which is a very innovative kind of blend of port wine with our straight rye whiskeys. That's for a very different customer. So it's exciting. And for me, it's like, this is what whiskey is supposed to be about. It's fun. You can get into conversations about it. Some people will like what they like, other people will like what they like, and that's okay. And it's good to have these robust conversations. I like this. This is what we should be doing. I think we've got a huge opportunity at Templeton where we can control our own destiny through the distillery. Plus obviously the existing portfolio that we've got, the 4, the 6, the 10, which is all through our sourcing a partner. And in actual fact, at the end of this year, we will also be releasing a 13-year-old, which is a 95 and 5. So that's
Don't tease me with a good time.
Listen, I'm telling you, you should wait for that. That's a limited edition coming to the end of this year. It's a 13-year-old. I tasted it today at the distillery from the barrel. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And it's 13-year-old, 95 and 5. Obviously, it's sourced. But if you think about that sourcing partner, there's not a lot of 13-year-old rye whiskeys even coming from that particular stable. So watch that space.
Yeah. Okay. Just waiting for my flight to Omaha.
Hey, we got to get you guys down. Honestly, we do. So
I've never. You can get us to Iowa for the first time ever.
Yeah. You just have to get babysitters. Can we get one babysitter that can look after all our kids in one place, and we can all go down? That'd be great.
No. Our kids would probably get along.
Yeah,
I think so.
If there's a field and a ball, it'll all be okay. Yeah. Perfect. Well, Shane, we really appreciate you staying up with us late. It's 10:30 as we close this podcast out, and just talking Templeton. Really excited for the future, and I will go find a bottle of Fortitude when it shows up in Kentucky, because I need a daily sip for $39.99. I'll take it. So appreciate it. Appreciate it, man.
I'm really happy. Thank you for the time. This is the conversations that we want to be doing. We want to be talking about the Templeton story and where we're going, where we've come from. I can't change anything in the past, so I can only change what we're happening in the future. And that's essentially what we're doing. And I'm super excited. I think we've got some great things. The Fortitude is a fantastic first distillate coming out of Templeton Distillery, even though it's a brand that people will know. This is, for me, it's like a new baby that's out there, and there's much more to come. I mean, the other mash bill that we've got, the bourbon mash bill, which is 75% corn. I think Scott, that's something I want to put. I'm going to put your name on one of those early bottles for sure, based on your what you like. And that's how it works. I mean, that's whiskey. That's why we're in the whiskey business. Everyone likes something different, and hey, that's why it's so exciting. That's why we're all here.
Yep, for sure. Well, we appreciate it, and to our listeners, we're gonna go Irish here. Sláinte.
Sláinte.
I can't pronounce it right, so I'll say cheers.
That was actually perfect. That was scarily perfect. Yeah, Sláinte.
My wife says sluncheon, so. Sluncheon, because she's true Kentuckian. But Shane, again, appreciate you, brother.
Let me just say one more thing, just from the Irish perspective, and you guys will like this. I'm not sure if you obviously bourbon lens or whether you drink Scotch whiskey or not. But my Scotch whiskey friends will thank me for this. But Irish whiskey, of course, in Ireland we invented whiskey, and the Scots will say that they invented whiskey. But we invented whiskey in Ireland, and we actually gave the Scots two things. We gave one whiskey, and two was the kilts, the dresses. And they were never supposed to wear those kilts. It was only a joke for most of them. So I'll leave you with that one.
There we go. Well, sorry for all the Scottish people out there. But until next time, guys, we'll catch you later. And thanks for listening to this episode of The Bourbon Lens.
Take care, guys. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Shane.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.